Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We basically have an LA Riot sandwich for you today. We're going to start with why Gavin Newsom might not have been all that motivated to get those riots under control right away. We'll also hear from Karen Bass, who just every time she steps up to the microphone, it just gets worse for her politically and policy-wise. And we're also going to dig into, hey, why is the U.S. moving some diplomatic personnel and dependents out of nations in the Middle East? Is this as dire as some people are suggesting, or is something else afoot? But Jim, we're going to find out that perhaps there's some financial interests, not only for Gavin Newsom, but the groups that are seemingly bankrolling the unrest in L.A.
You know, there's that old, is it cui bono? Who benefits? You know, there's always that interesting question of who benefits from chaos in the streets of Los Angeles. And I think we're going to get some answers real soon. So
make sure you don't miss that. In the meantime, BetterHelp. This is an ad for BetterHelp. And look, whether it's your career goals, whether it's your personal relationships, whether it's just feeling like you're stuck in life, maybe it's time to talk to one of those professionals, and BetterHelp could very well be the connection that you need. And specifically for men right now, a lot of pressure to perform, to provide, to keep it all together. Don't keep it bottled up. Talk to somebody who can really help you. That could be BetterHelp.
With more than 35,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served more than 5 million people all around the world. And it's got an App Store rating of 4.9 out of 5 based on more than 1.7 million client reviews. And it's convenient, too. You can join a session with a therapist at the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life. And remember, you can switch therapists at any time.
As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. So talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/3ml. That's betterhelp.com/3ml. All right, Jim, as we said, we're going to start with the LA riots. We're going to close with the LA riots with some significant Middle East tension in between. So just a very relaxing day here on the Three Martini Lunch. But of course, if you've been with us over the last several days, you know we've talked a lot about the LA riots from a lot of different perspectives. If you haven't heard those yet, check us out. Apple, Spotify, Spreaker, anywhere you get your podcasts. And so right now we're going to focus on the money issue. And specifically, as happens often in politics, why politicians do certain things and where the money is coming from that might be helping them decide to make those decisions. And so Gavin Newsom has been very curiously uninterested in restoring order in Los Angeles. He's been out there demonizing Trump, demonizing ICE. It's his job, of course, along with the mayor, to restore order, but doesn't seem interested in doing so. And I think we're starting to figure out why, thanks to Jed McFadder. He is a journalist and he's the co-author of Fool's Gold, along with Susan Crabtree, who we've talked about a number of times on the podcast. She writes a lot about the Secret Service, and I think that's probably where we've mostly referred to her, those sorts of stories. But here's what Jed McFadder says. Breaking an exclusive, why is Gavin Newsom doubling down so hard on anti-ICE lawlessness in L.A.? Is it payback for big dollar support during the failed attempt to recall him in 2021? CHIRLA, the Coalition for Human Immigrant Rights.
I should point out he missed that, which kind of, it always seemed like a little weird of like, was he talking about animal immigrant rights, plant immigrant rights? Is this some fast-growing trees effort, invasive species? But no, it's humane immigrant rights, sorry.
That does make a whole lot more sense. So yes, okay, so CHIRLA, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, donated nearly $500,000 to oppose the 2021 recall against Newsom. And CHIRLA is an advocacy group at the center of the anti-ICE protests in LA. And they sponsored a political action committee called Immigrant Power PAC, which donated a total of $471,000 to the Million Voter Project opposing the recall of Governor Newsom. Now, CHIRLA Executive Director Angelica Salas served as treasurer of Immigrant Power PAC while also managing an army of CHIRLA volunteers who fought against Newsom's recall. The Million Voter Project in recent days helped promote, quote, an urgent call to action to its supporters for an emergency rally in downtown LA to call out the reckless, harmful, and dangerous actions that ICE, police, and other agencies collaborating with them are using to invade California schools and workplaces. And they've got some documentation on that Twitter post as well. And so, Jim, I mean, this is the oldest story in politics. Follow the money and you'll find out why politicians make the decisions they make. So this group wrangles up a lot of volunteers to help Gavin Newsom survive politically. They raise a lot of money for him. And so when they create a bunch of mischief in downtown LA, Gavin Newsom's not going to get too worried about it.
Yes, Greg. And also we should probably note that Josh Hawley, who we should acknowledge is not always our favorite senator, is a Republican from Missouri. Lately, he's been in the news for opposing other Republican efforts at Medicaid reform and wanting to raise the minimum wage. But the good Josh Hawley has showed up to work and has written a letter to Angela Salas of the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights stating, quote, credible reporting now suggests that your organization has provided logistical support and financial resources to individuals engaged in these disruptive actions in LA. Let me be clear, bankrolling civil unrest is not protected speech. It is aiding and abetting criminal conduct. You must immediately cease and desist any further involvement in the organization. And he wants their preservation of their records from November 5th of last year until very recently. So we'll see what Hawley found. He said it's credible reporting. I would have preferred if he'd kind of laid out some of that credible reporting. But I suspect, Greg, that if you're watching, the footage of these, I think what can fairly be characterized as riots in LA, every time someone says they're not really riots, I just kind of feel like this is some version of the Rob Lowe character from Wayne's World saying that, well, unless it's from the Riota region of France, it's not a genuine riot. It's merely sparkling urban unrest. But you watch that and you see all these, tons of young men all wearing, almost all of them wearing masks, running into stores, grabbing stuff, running away. Sometimes the cops get them. And you kind of like, who are these people? How are they making a living? What are they doing when they're not out looting or setting things on fire or smashing windows of stores, smashing windows of cop cars, things like that? And I suspect some of these people are criminals, like career criminals. This is what they do to support themselves. Some may not be. I suspect you're not going to find a lot of pillars of the community, who are moonlighting as masked rioters or things like that. But you kind of wonder, how are these people supporting themselves? How are these people making a living when they're not doing these sorts of things? If they are being supported by an organization like this, well, all of a sudden some of the pieces start to fall into place. The idea of, whether they say that they're professional rioters. I don't know if you really get to be a professional rioter, Greg. I don't know how often there are. Question of when do you get drafted by the rioting teams and all that kind of stuff. Most of these guys are semi-pro at best. And I just want to point out, what are the reasons the average American citizen or even the average Los Angelino is not participating in things like this? Is because, if there's always a chance you're going to get arrested. If you're running into a store and grabbing stuff or anyway, there's always a chance that you're the one who the cops are going to focus upon. They'll tackle you and you end up facing charges. And your average citizen doesn't want to go to jail. Your average citizen's like, well, I got to go to work. I got to support my kids. I have responsibilities. I have obligations. I can't take the risk of doing that sort of thing. The people who loot a store effectively have nothing to risk. And generally, those are people who don't have jobs or really don't like their jobs and don't really care if they get arrested and end up missing out on work. I would love to know if this organization or any other are the ones who are throwing money around to help people maybe putting up bail, maybe doing what they can to make sure these people get back on the street as quickly as possible. Good luck in your hunting, Senator Hawley, and hopefully we get some answers to all of this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can make the call, urgent call to action, emergency rally, obviously. As long as the protest is peaceful, that's perfectly legitimate. But now if you're bankrolling materials that are coming in, we've heard reports of frozen water bottles. We've heard reports of these face shields. The FBI apparently made an arrest of somebody who supplied that. Don't know if they're connected to Chirla. But if you are somehow aiding and abetting the violent part of this, there's got to be some significant legal repercussions to this as well. So it's good to see the money trail being actively and publicly followed here, because it's always been just mind-boggling how quickly the left can suddenly rally people, sometimes paying people to show up too, and just having all these materials, all these signs, allegedly homemade, but they're mass-produced in a number of different ways. The left is not good on policy, but they're very good at rabble-rousing and making it look like, at least in the eyes of the media, who are more than willing to believe them, that this sort of thing is just authentic and grassroots when it's really not.
Greg, for a force dedicated to chaos, they're surprisingly organized. And the second thing is that, look, I look at this, you look at where all they get the signs, they get all the banners. Where are they getting the Molotov cocktails for? Cocktails in LA are really expensive. How are they managing to pay for all this? Greg, this is all the work of the protest industrial complex. Clearly, a big protest, as you call it. They're squeezing out the small protest organizations that want to participate in this. It's a monopoly, I tell you.
It sounds hilarious, but in some ways, that's actually exactly what's happening. So the left, they're not competent at many things, but they aren't that, unfortunately. More on LA a little bit later in the podcast when we talk about the illustrious mayor of the City of Angels. But first, let's talk about your business. They say you can have better, cheaper, or faster, but you can only have two of those. But what if you could have all three at the same time? That's exactly what Cohere, Thomson Reuters, and Specialized Bikes have since they upgraded to the next generation of the cloud and its Oracle Cloud infrastructure. Right now, with zero commitment, you can try OCI for free at oracle.com/martini.
How is it faster? Well, OCI's block storage gives you more operations per second. How is it cheaper? Well, OCI costs up to 50% less for computing, 70% less for storage, and up to 80% less for networking. And how is it better? Well, in test after test, OCI customers report lower latency and higher bandwidth versus other clouds. This is the cloud that's built for AI and all of your biggest workloads.
Yeah, OCI is the blazing fast platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and your AI needs. And right now, as we said, with zero commitment, you can try OCI for free. That's oracle.com/martini, oracle.com/martini, oracle.com/martini. All right, Jim, on to a curious second martini. It was just yesterday, I think, that we're talking about Tulsi Gabbard and her cryptic nuclear video, and we were wondering if there really is an immediate nuclear threat, and if there was, why there was no specifics there. Could it be Russia? Could it be China? Could it be Iran? And that last one now is on the minds of more people after events yesterday. And if you want to hear our Tulsi Gabbard conversation, head to Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. But the U.S. State and Defense Departments on Wednesday made efforts to arrange the departure of non-essential personnel from locations around the Middle East, according to U.S. officials and sources familiar with the efforts. According to this official, it's not clear what's causing the sudden change in posture, but Central Command is monitoring developing tension in the Middle East. Developing tension in the Middle East, quote unquote. Trump was asked about this upon arriving at the Kennedy Center to watch Les Mis last night, and he says, quote, "They are being moved out because it could be a dangerous place, and we'll see what happens. But they have been, or we've been given notice to move out, and we'll see what happens." Now, the State Department is also preparing to order the departure of non-essential personnel from embassies in Iraq, Bahrain, and Kuwait due to increased security risks in the region, Jim. So, I mean, does this mean, look, these diplomatic talks with Iran aren't going to work and we've got to stop them from getting the bomb and we're going to be in position to do that if we have to? Is it kind of gamesmanship showing Iran, you might want to reconsider this deal that we've got on the table? What do you think's happening?
We should point out that for listeners, we're taping this, we're getting close to between 12 and 1 on Thursday afternoon. And so far, nothing has happened. If something happens between now and when you listen to this, it's not our fault. But having said that, at 11:25, I got a PR pitch from a PR company. Imminent Israeli strike on Iran, expert available. Now, when even the PR companies are putting this in their pitches, you've lost the element of secrecy, right? It's now all over Madison Avenue, but hey, we're going to hit Iran, or at least the Israelis are. It was very strange because our listeners may recall that back in 2005, 2007, I lived in Ankara. I was technically part of the embassy community there. And moving the civilians out is not the sort of thing you do on a whim. Generally, that's a sign that there's something really serious there. Never had to be evacuated out of Turkey. It was never that much serious. But like this, every State Department, every embassy has procedures for this. And I imagine in a place like Iraq, it's more, you're on a slightly, the odds of having to do that are a little bit higher than a lot of other places. I'd even heard that there was basically variations of this order were basically going to any U.S. embassy within striking distance of Iran, which kind of indicates that we expect some sort of retaliation. Now, that may mean potential U.S. strike. That may mean Israeli strike. I think it's very safe to say the U.S. government expects something to happen, and that goes beyond Trump's cryptic words at the Kennedy Center last night. So, look, I believe it was a little more than 2 months ago, Trump said that, well, we're going to see how negotiations with Iran go. We'll give them 2 more months. And that deadline has passed. Now, apparently, Witkoff was supposed to meet with them more in the coming days. And, there are a bunch of people who are watching this who feel like these negotiations are going around in circles. There was a talk of a deal on the table not being particularly good that basically would allow the Iranians to continue enriching uranium as long as there was international observers. Wink, wink. Because look, if there's anything we've learned from the past 4 decades, Greg, you can always trust the Iranian government to be a straight shooter. They're always above board. And it's a great accomplishment for President Trump having gotten rid of the Iran deal under Obama that was so terrible that now actually we might, now it sounds like maybe we won't. And if we're taking steps like this, maybe this is saber rattling. Maybe this is kind of meant to say to Iran that our patience at the negotiating table is not eternal. Considering how I was really not enamored with that prospect of what sounds like, Iran deal 2.0, then I am glad to see the U.S. listing this option. And I think this is a case where, some strategic ambiguity of what our intentions are and what the Israeli intentions are good. Also, when the U.S. does something like this, and reportedly there were a lot of reports of, Israeli jets taking off last night, but no indication that they'd made any airstrikes either in Iran or against Iranian proxies. When we do stuff like this, the Iranians make their countermaneuvers. They deploy their air defense measures and stuff like that. I wonder if some of this was kind of almost a dress rehearsal. Was meant to say, if we do this, how do they react? What do we need to do to counter their measures and things like that? Time will tell, but last night it definitely felt like something was imminent. Nothing has happened as of this recording. And once again, if something does happen, it's just because Greg and I didn't know about it yet.
Here's my question, though, Jim, because one of the frustrations that we've had and been told over the last couple of decades since we've been calling out Iran on this issue is that they're building these deep underground, and they did that intentionally so there couldn't be an effective strike. So does that mean that's not the case, or there are ways to disable that without going deep underground? I mean, I remember the Stuxnet virus, which was awesome, back in the late 2000s decade, 2009-ish, I think. And, that was very effective. The Israelis have had very good intelligence work delaying this, conveniently taking out nuclear scientists probably here and there. What can we actually accomplish through military action or otherwise if we need?
That is a great question, Greg. I would note that if you have some underground bunker, and whether you've got missiles in it or you've got some, centrifuges, you've got something down there that you don't want the Americans or Israelis to be able to destroy, well, obviously you need some sort of entrance to it, some sort of tunnel, elevator, some sort of way of getting all that stuff down underground. So if you were to bomb, if you've got every access port, every tunnel, every way of getting in, and you bombed all of them, well, then what good does that bunker get to you? At minimum, you're going to have to clear out a lot of rubble, and presumably you could cause some sort of cave-in or something like that. So I see that as a potential option, and maybe that's the next best thing. You can't necessarily destroy what's deep underground, but you can make it much harder for people to get down there and to actually use or deploy anything that's in there. So conceivably, there are half measures that could at least delay the Iranian program, but I suspect whatever the exact capabilities are the sort of things that the U.S. government would like to keep very, very secret.
No, this is serious issues now, given where we think the Iranians are with their nuclear program and the inability to deter them over the last couple of decades and really the last 45 plus years here since the Islamic Revolution. A lot of stress on that issue, not a lot of stress economically if you understand capitalism. And the best place to find out what capitalism really is and how it really works, Hillsdale College. A lot of other colleges are going to demonize capitalism, even though capitalism is part of what's made this country great. They'll say it's evil, they say it's greedy, but find out how it really works and how it's made way more people wealthy than there ever were before. It's called Understanding Capitalism. It's free online at Hillsdale.
And it's not just understanding capitalism. Hillsdale College is offering more than 40 free online courses. That's right, free. You can learn about the U.S. Constitution, the stories in the book of Genesis, the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, or the history of the ancient Christian church with Hillsdale College's free online courses.
Yeah, in these lectures, you're going to hear about very basic but critical economic concepts like profit and loss, how human nature, i.e. your choices, play a role in our economic system, and why capitalism is ultimately a system that encourages morality and does not undermine it. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/martini to enroll in this course, Understanding Capitalism. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/martini to enroll for free.
There are some ugly numbers when it comes to 401k balances.
The Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski. Every day, Chris helps unpack the connection between politics and the economy and how it affects your wallet.
Studies show people in their 30s have a staggeringly low amount of money in their 401ks. Even when companies match, they're wasting free money. Millennials have to put more money away.
Whether it's happening in D.C. or down on Wall Street, it's affecting you financially. Be informed. Check out the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast.
All right, Jim, let's swing back over to the West Coast and the LA riots over the ICE raids that started on Friday and continued for a number of days, as we said earlier. Karen Bass, we referred to her in Monday's edition, so check that out again if you haven't heard it. Her statement immediately siding with the rioters and basically blaming ICE and our immigrant community. She has been the most egregious violator of conflating immigrants and illegal immigrants in this whole episode, I think. But her statements have not improved since Friday. In fact, she was at the podium again yesterday and once again saying that the violence, the unrest, the property destruction, the store owners put out of business by these thugs, it's all Trump's fault.
A week ago, everything was peaceful in the city of Los Angeles and in all of the representatives behind me in their cities as well. Things began to be difficult on Friday when raids took place, and it's important that I begin there because that is the cause of the problems that have happened in the city of Los Angeles and other cities. This was provoked by the White House. The reason why, we don't know.
The reason why is because there's a ton of people in the country and in your area illegally, many of whom are criminals, and we want to round them up and get them out. But basically your argument, Jim, is if you want to restore law and order and enforce laws, that's going to lead to chaos and unrest. Quite the progression of logic there.
Yeah, before I dive into kind of a deeper analysis of Karen Bass and how she ended up here and how the city is kind of stuck with her as the mayor as this crisis goes on. Last night was the second night in which there was a curfew in Los Angeles, in the mayor's words, quote, to stop bad actors who are taking advantage of the president's chaotic escalation. So Carrot Top, Pauly Shore, you're on notice. She's watching out for you. So all other bad actors in Hollywood. I also want to remind listeners, it was back in 2020, Karen Bass was reportedly one of the finalists to be Joe Biden's running mate. And she was, at that point, not a terribly well-known member of Congress. She'd represented, California out there for a long time. But it was a little bit of a surprise, and there was a general sense that she was well-liked. Had been chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and all that stuff. But a lot of people kind of thought, wow, this is, this was someone who kind of surprised that she made it that far into the vetting. Now, once, you see the results of Kamala Harris, I could see some people saying, how much difference would it have made? But, when she ran for mayor, people were kind of surprised. She had no executive experience. She ran against Rick Caruso. As listeners no doubt remember, it was really 5 months ago that large chunks of the city of Los Angeles, including Pacific Palisades, burned to the ground. And while it's not, wholeheartedly a result of city or state policies, the consequences of those fires were exacerbated by bad decision-making. And, Karen Bass was infamously on the other side of the world attending the inauguration of a president over in Africa and did not immediately turn around to come back. And so probably, I suspect a lot of listeners remember seeing her on what looked like the airplane jetway, getting questions asked by a reporter. Where have you been? What have you been doing? Your city's been burning down. And her just kind of staring stone-faced, attempting to ignore the reporter, but just the reporter's 3 feet away. And there was nowhere for her to go because they hadn't started deplaning yet. And I kind of looked at that and I was like, wow, we have a bunch of not great mayors in this country. Brandon Johnson, Eric Adams, the mayor brought to you by Turkish Airlines. There's a whole bunch of them that are, but I thought being on the other side of the world, as I point out, there were risk of wildfires was before she left had been announced by the National Weather Service. Let's say you're on your way over there and you realize how bad it is, and you immediately turned around and you cut short your stay at the embassy party and at the inauguration festivities. I think people would have been a lot more forgiving. Sometimes you're on your way for a foreign trip and something comes up and you got to turn around. The fact that she didn't do any of that and was seen, and there are pictures of her at the embassy party while the city is struggling to control the fires, really looked really bad. I had talked about the procedures for a recall, and it really didn't get off the ground, kind of surprisingly. Rick Caruso, the businessman who's a Democrat, wink, wink. He was on the Reagan Library Board. Okay, we know that by Los Angeles standards, Rich Caruso is probably about as far to the right as you could reasonably expect to be and have a chance of getting elected. Caruso opposed a recall and said that the city needs to focus on rebuilding. And also there was a lot of people who point out if you attempt a recall election that gives, it would distract Karen Bass, justifiably so. And I can see people saying, well, if she's distracted, how much worse can things get? But also that sense of, I think Rick Caruso did not want to give her any excuse for poor performance heading forward. And look, he's out there. We're not. He's the guy who clearly, I think, wants to be mayor again someday. There's a logic to that. But the consequence is that you leave Karen Bass in place until the next election. And I think now we see the consequences of this. And it's kind of goes full. This like, what if instead of always pouring gasoline onto the fire, and they kept insisting, oh, if you send troops, you're going to exacerbate the situation. Okay, then the LAPD has to take control of the situation and ensure not just the safety on the streets, but also the protection of ICE agents as they do their jobs. When an angry mob surrounds the federal building, the LAPD needs to respond, and in a timely manner. As we discussed earlier this week, it's an 8-minute walk, a 1-minute car ride. It's right down the street from LAPD headquarters. And it took them more than 2 hours to get there. That to me indicates either the LAPD is utterly incompetent, tough to believe, insert diehard joke here, or it is a sign that they didn't want to respond. They wanted to send a message to the feds of, oh, we're going to respond, but we're going to get there as a sort of de facto form of protest to what ICE is doing. Look, Immigration and Customs Enforcement has the right to enforce the law anywhere in the United States. Home Depot is not a special place where you're not allowed to arrest someone who's in the country illegally. It's not the Continental Hotel from the John Wick movies, right? It's not Ali Oxenfree. You can't arrest me here or something. So if ICE wants to arrest people who are in the country, they got to do it. And you don't get to opt out of federal immigration. Being a sanctuary city means you're not going to have your police cooperate in the arresting of these people. It doesn't mean you're like, well, you know what? We're not going to protect federal buildings. You don't get to be a sanctuary city and say, we're actually going to oppose. The mayor of Denver was talking about that. He backtracked really fast when he recognized that was, that is kind of insurrection-y. That is kind of saying we're going to use our government forces to stand up against your government forces. I think we resolved this back in 1865. Could be crazy. But then, there was that comic book entitled Calexit, indicating that at some point California was going to try to secede. But anyway, so here we go. Like, we're now in June. Greg, what's the rest of the year going to bring to Karen Bass? And if you're in Los Angeles, like you've been through the disaster of the wildfires. You could argue the response to the wildfires and the fact that last I checked, they'd approved 14 permits in Pacific Palisades for rebuilding. Like hundreds of structures were destroyed, thousands. And now that you have on top of this unrest in the streets and the fact that police can't respond to federal building being surrounded by angry protesters. You almost wondered, did she expect the job was going to be ceremonial? Did she think it was going to be, cutting ribbons and appearing at, with kids and doing reading to schools and stuff like that? Did she realize the job of mayor is actually hard? Because she certainly is acting like she had no idea what she was in for when she took the job.
Yeah, she has this glazed look about her most of the time. I don't know if she had that on Capitol Hill for all the years she was up there or not. But Jim, the way you described that just reminds me that, of course, that Joe Biden in March, right after COVID hit, said in that one debate with Bernie Sanders, I'm going to have a woman running mate. And then after George Floyd, it's going to be a black woman running mate. And then based on at least the reports that I can remember, it came down to Kamala Harris, Karen Bass, and Susan Rice.
Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, was in there for about 10 minutes too.
Yeah. So the crime rate in Atlanta's really did well under her thing. So you've got Susan Rice, who basically needs to hire the baggage handlers union with all the baggage that she brought in from the Obama years. So I could see why they didn't want that. Karen Bass, clearly unimpressive. So of the three, it almost starts to make sense why he picked Harris, but really he just should have shoved all the resumes off the desk and said, try again.
We've had arguments about identity politics in the Democratic Party for a long time. And when you announce, I'm only selecting amongst women, black women, you're not saying Kamala Harris is the best choice for the job. You're saying Kamala Harris is the best African-American, half African-American woman, half Indian woman for the job. And, unsurprisingly, people look at her differently when you say, under these parameters, she was the best choice available, instead of being the best choice available out of all the options.
Not a good sign. And all three of them have not exactly shown very positively over the last several years here. So anyway, we'll see what comes next in LA, and we'll certainly see what comes next in the Middle East. We'll be watching. Jim, see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us again today. Please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. We'd love to have them listening. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a terrific Thursday. Join us again Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.